from the headquarters of Telesa English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Emike Omoli. Welcome. We start in Venezuela, where people have started to withdraw cash from ATMs for the first time in months. The new Sovreign Bolivar currency came into circulation on Monday. The government axed 5 zeros off the old currency and issued new banknotes. It's an attempt to curb hyperinflation. The Sovreign Bolivar is anchored to the country's digital currency, the petro. Each petro is worth $60. This is based on the price of a barrel of Venezuelan oil that corresponds to 3,600 Sovreign Bolivars.
I'm getting the first ones. These are my first Sovreign Bolivars banknotes. 2 bolivars is the equivalent to 200,000 bolivars. 5 is equal to 500,000.
The hope we all have is that the new banknotes will start to circulate along with some from the 1,000 bolivar banknote to that of 100,000.
On his part, President Nicolas Maduro says Venezuelans should remain positive about the changes. He argues the new economic measures will lead the country to prosperity.
A new and historic process has started for Venezuela's economy. It should bring us recovery, stabilization, and to economic growth in the midterm, a real growth with real welfare. Regarding prices, we are signing an agreement on Wednesday with all the agro-industry businessmen. The first agreement to establish what we call the 25 basic prices. This is an agreement to establish prices. I call for all Venezuelans to review these prices and look for a balance between wages, income, and prices. A balance that we don't have today.
Residents in the Brazilian border town of Pacaraima have paraded for peace after attacks on Venezuelan migrants last weekend. A convoy with white flags and balloons marched in support of human rights. Residents in the area also denied accusations that they are xenophobic. Brazil sent troops to its border with Venezuela after the incident.
These are movements in favor of peace, of the well-being of our town, of the Brazilian and Venezuelan people. May they live in peace without violating each other's rights.
Now to Chile, where dozens of people have held a vigil to demand justice be dished out to perpetrators of sexual abuse. Demonstrators gathered in front of the Metropolitan Cathedral in the capital Santiago with flowers and candles. The prosecutor investigating the sex abuse scandal says several Catholic bishops could face charges. 158 members of the church are being investigated. Sexual abuse reports date back to the 1960s, involving more than 200 victims.
People who have been silenced by the abuse, silenced by the trauma, silenced by the hierarchy of the church. This is a way of demonstrating that the silence, abuse, and trauma do not always triumph. We are raising our voice.
It is not enough to continue listening to the word forgiveness. What if we wait for the Vatican and for the Church to deliver all the information they have? That they do not keep waiting for the prosecutor to ask for information?
Meanwhile, Pope Francis has promised that no effort will be spared to prevent abuse and its cover-up. The pontiff condemned the atrocities of child sex abuse. In a letter, he addressed failures to deal with abuse and asked for forgiveness. This came just a week after it was reported that more than 1,000 minors were abused by 300 priests in the US. The Holy See just announced the Pope will also meet Irish sexual abuse victims next weekend in Dublin. Brazil's Foreign Relations Minister says his country will support a redesign of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR. He made the announcement during an official visit to Bolivia.
The Foreign Ministry delegations for Brazil and Bolivia discussed a wide range of bilateral agenda, including a mega construction project of the interoceanic corridor to link the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans.
We are talking about mega projects as the interoceanic corridor that is under discussion. Also, gas topics and urea are significant topics. We are experiencing a good phase in the bilateral relations with Brazil.
The Foreign Ministry of Brazil, Aloysio Nunes Ferreira, also extended his support for the restructuring of the South American Nations Union, or UNASUR, as many of its members decided not to be part of this integration institute.
Brazil is committed to maintain this integration system. We are attached to the UNASUR existence for a number of reasons and issues. It highlights such as health, regional integration, aviation, offshore crimes, border security, etc.
Crisis in UNASUR started this year just when Bolivia took the pro-tempore presidency.
We have to seek for dialogue, still in the frame of UNASUR, so that we can overcome the political impasses that are blocking its operation and save the institution, to boost it, to direct it in a more accurate way with practical issues that are interesting for the lives of our people, and separate the ideological differences between different state actors.
The South American Union took its name in 2007. It is supported by 20 countries, out of which 6 member nations, Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Peru, announced their disassociation in April. In September, the foreign ministers of the member countries are set to meet in Paraguay.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in a minute.
So yeah, national security is one of the most powerful notions in modern times. To swindle, I think, people, to do things that are not in their best interest, and to support massive military complexes that are not in anybody's interest, but that are like cancers feeding on society.
Watch a series where the U.S. geopolitical strategies as an empire representing the culture of war and propaganda are shown, and how this has served as a tool of social control. Psy-War. Saturday. Only on Telesur. Good to have you back. Latest polls in Brazil show jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva extending his lead for October's election. Lula's support has increased by 5%. This is the first major poll result published since candidacies were officially registered last week. The survey also found that almost half of his supporters would transfer their votes to his running mate Fernando Haddad. That's if Lula is disqualified from running in October's presidential race, the most unpredictable in decades. The Defense Ministry of Colombia has announced it will activate a plan to rescue 9 people kidnapped by the National Liberation Army, or ELN. In a statement, the ministry said authorities are preparing protocols for the operation with the support of the Red Cross. They also clarified that this process is not part of the peace negotiations between the government and the armed group currently on hold. 3 policemen, 2 civilians and a soldier were kidnapped on August 2nd. Still in Colombia, President Ivan Duque has announced an increase to income tax on the working class. His government also intends a tax reduction for companies. This is part of the economic reactivation plan of the newly elected government.
The announcement has created an uproar in opposition sectors as they say Duque broke his campaign promises. Officials made the announcement at a public meeting with business representatives of the country. 49 Colombian and Venezuelan women have been rescued from sexual slavery during a police raid. 18 people have been arrested so far with charges of sexual crimes. 26 Colombians and 23 Venezuelans were victims of a network of human trafficking which deceived them with false promises of work to take them captive. The criminal network also seized their passports and IDs to ban them from escaping. The police raid took place in several nightclubs in the tourist port of Cartagena.
These women were forced to live in the basements of these establishments, where they obtained upkeep and accommodation in exchange for sexually commercializing them under the networks of pimps who forced them, obligated them and charged the supposed fees they had been promised for work.
In Honduras, the daughter of murdered indigenous leader Berta Cáceres has called the international community to monitor the trial against her mother's killers. Berta Zuniga says the judicial process is full of irregularities and denounced the government for not being committed to deliver justice. Cáceres was killed in March 2016 for defending rights over a river in the west of the country where a hydroelectric project was planned. The trial against the 8 accused will begin on September 10th.
Everything that we have denounced, like the irregularities of the public ministry's management, who behave like an adversary and not as an ally of the victims, corresponds to a logic of impunity in order to protect higher responsibilities.
In Ecuador, traditional fishery workers have protested against the government's inaction to protect the sector. They also rejected the presence of heavy industrial ships in the water exclusively reserved for traditional fishing. Demonstrators asked the government to declare a state of emergency for the sector and are demanding the resignation of the Agriculture and Fishing Minister, Ana Katsuka Druet.
The reason for this protest is to ask the authorities to listen to our necessities. We are traditional fishery workers, let that be clear. We don't want the traditional fishery workers mixed with the industrial fishery workers.
Researchers have warned that the intensity of weather systems will be even greater due to climate change. The pulse of this global phenomenon is largely felt in Central America, where higher mid-year rainfall levels have already had greater impact, especially in Costa Rica.
Over the last few years, the severe consequences of climate change have been felt in the region like never before. Researcher Luis Fernando Alvarado has carefully studied these shifts.
Costa Rica had a history of being directly affected by hurricanes, but in 2016 the country was hard hit and suffered severe damage. It was the first hurricane that deeply affected us in hundreds of years.
Heavy rains have caused widespread flooding and destruction in Costa Rica. Government disaster agencies were on the ground responding to emergencies. Nonetheless, the president resolved to rectify this problem.
The climate change situation is here to stay. We must deal with it, and I'm not talking about temporary solutions or last-minute responses. We must get to the core of the issue and solve it. If you notice, this has been happening for some time.
The National Meteorology Institute has warned to brace for more disasters ahead, apart from the 29 tropical storms which have already impacted the country since the hurricane season started on June 1st.
Climate change will worsen the normal conditions of our country. It will make it rain heavier in rainy areas like Limón, or will dry out hotter zones like Guanacaste.
Researchers recommend that long-term public policies are implemented to prevent a recurrence of the problem.
We are talking about astounding changes for the end of the century, but we can act now to reduce the consequences of climate change.
Adapting to climate change requires serious commitment and delivery from the government, but also from the people, because they will be the most affected in the coming years.
El Salvador has officially established diplomatic relations with China after the Central American nation broke ties with Taiwan. Salvadoran Foreign Minister Carlos Castaneda said his country has made a strategic decision, a beneficial path for the people of both nations. After recognizing the China one-child policy, Castaneda signed, or the One China policy, he signed a document with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Taiwan is now left with only 17 allies across the world.
We are convinced that this is the right path that will lead us to the development of mutual benefit for our people.
Maintaining the One China policy is a widely acknowledged international policy. It is the international consensus and the basis of China's relation with any country.
Mexico's outgoing President Enrique Peña Nieto and President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador have held a meeting to start the transition process of the government. Pablo Perez brings us more details from Mexico City.
In Palacio Nacional, the official government location here in Mexico City, where the still acting President Enrique Peña Nieto held a meeting with the President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador, a meeting that started the transition process that will end on December 1st, when Andrés Manuel López Obrador will be sworn in as Mexico's new president. In the meeting, both members of both cabinets were present and discussed different issues around the transition process, and also on sensitive topics such as the building of the new airport in Mexico City, a project that has been on discussion and been highly conflictuous during the last few years, and the liberation and exculpation of the boss of the teachers union, Elbester Gordillo, that was released today, and said that with her release, the educational reform that was pushed by Peña Nieto has officially ended. Something that both the acting president and the president-elect said that it is not so. The acting president says that the reform will still be in place as long as they stay on the government, and the president-elect says that they will start a process to change the educational reform when they take in as president.
Pablo Perez reporting that. Peru's autonomous National School of Fine Arts has been celebrating 100 years since it opened. As part of the celebration, an exhibition called Plural is on display.
138 graduated painters from the School of Fine Arts between 1977 and 1992 have displayed their artwork in the exhibit Plural. Many are award-winning artists, well recognized all around the world. The exhibition shows diversity of genres, as neo-figurative, that Orlando Segarra uses to transmit an ecologist message.
I wish all beaches from Peru to be like this, clean, healthy, full of life, love, that makes one feel fresh, suited with the rhythm of the sea waves.
Plural is one of the activities held for the centennial anniversary of Peru's School of Fine Arts Study Center, and according to its students, it symbolizes the formation of craft.
The craft means drawing, composition, and rhythm, all the elements that are important in an art piece. All these elements are valid for painting, music, and architecture, for all the arts.
In this exhibition, genres such as hyperrealism, impressionism, kinetism, pop, and abstract can be found. The common factor are the artists who studied fine arts during the internal armed conflict times, as well as during the Morales Bermudez and Fujimori's tenure.
Many of them played a part in groups that started their artistic work, committed to social causes, with forefront artistic collectives, breaking continuity with the traditional art schools, etc., with experimentation of new mediums. This is the generation that somehow consolidate the contemporary art of Peru.
The School of Fine Arts is considered a national heritage of the country. Distinguished masters and proven artists as Daniel Hernandez, José Sabogal, Guzmán Suárez, Vertiz are some of the most famous artists who graduated from this prestigious institute.
Stay with us. We'll be back right after this break.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur. With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud, amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. A recent poll has exposed the high level of distrust the British public have towards their media. Pablo Navarrete reports from London.
According to a poll by the European Broadcast Union published earlier this year, the United Kingdom is second in Europe after Malta in terms of public distrust of the media. 52% of the British population has low confidence or mistrust in the media, and 73% of the public distrust the written press.
Most people in this country, so for instance, didn't vote for this government at the last election. Over 60% of the electorate didn't vote for this government. However, most of this country's press are supporters of this government. The press aren't where their customers are.
Public distrust towards the internet and social media is also high. According to the poll, 65% of people tend not to trust information found on the web, and 73% don't trust social media information. The recent Facebook scandal over user privacy is unlikely to improve trust levels.
You've seen a very different reaction in the new media companies to the old media. The new media companies you see taking it seriously, they're talking about it. Facebook is an example, they keep talking about what's their action plan, what they're doing to get trust back. Old media, the print media, you hear nothing.
Corporate control of traditional media outlets worries many. For example, 5 billionaires own 80% of the British press, and the BBC is increasingly being criticised for showing anti-left-wing bias.
It's clear the UK public no longer trusts the British media. That is because the UK press fails to stand up to the interests of the wealthy and the powerful. We need a media, a quality independent media, that stands up for what people need and against those interests. That media needs supporting and funding.
The growth of an independent media movement is one of the results of the distrust the British public have in their media. While political debate becomes increasingly polarised, it will be difficult in the short term to reverse this distrust. Pablo Navarrete, Telesur, London.
Mali's Constitutional Court has declared Ibrahim Boubacar Keita president after he won the runoff election on the 12th of August. Keita's re-election came despite fierce criticism of failures to tackle the growing violence and ethnic tensions in the country. His major challenge as he starts the new term will be to strengthen a 2015 peace accord between the government-allied groups and former Tuareg rebels. It is seen as a cornerstone of peace in the country. Now let's take a look at some of the other news from around the world.
The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has confirmed that thousands of displaced Syrian families have returned home, with the number dropping to around 57,000. The news comes as the Syrian government has regained most of the territory in the southwest of the country. However, the need for humanitarian assistance continues. Police in Uganda have used live rounds and tear gas to disperse protesters amid growing political unrest over the treatment of opposition figures, including local pop star turned politician Bobi Wine, who is a government critic. One person has been killed and 5 others injured in the crackdown, and around 45 arrested so far. Tensions have been mounting since legislators were arrested for campaigning in a by-election last week. Protesters say the government is repressing opposition.
What have we done? They're here telling us we are using orders from above. Who above? That is the very order they used when they damaged Bobby Wine. Bobby Wine was damaged beyond recognition. The president is there telling us that Bobby Wine shot his vehicle with bullets. When?
Iran's first homemade fighter jet, named Kosar, has completed its first test run. Kosar was unveiled in a ceremony on Defense Industry Day attended by President Hassan Rouhani. Iran exclusively developed the avionics and a fire control system, making them one of the few countries with the skills to do so. Future models will have training and fighting capabilities.
Palestinians are celebrating the annual Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha. Thousands of worshippers flocked to Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa compound to offer prayers. The Eid al-Adha commemorates the willingness of Ibrahim to sacrifice his son under God's command, a story also recognized by Jews and Christians. God finally intervened and provided a lamb to be sacrificed instead. The sacrificed animals are shared with relatives, friends, and the poor. We've come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories, find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And of course, we are on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Emike Omolu, and thank you for watching.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence